Hello and welcome to LPA's quarterly training. This is on the topic of touchscreen editing. And for today, we are going to begin with the end in mind. So I'm using a sample from one of my customers, Buckhead Butcher, who has graciously allowed us to use an example I created for them as our demo today. So I'm going into, just to show you where we're headed, I'm going into standard counterpoint point of sale touchscreen. And here is our layout. Some things to point out because we'll need to know these terms for later. Counterpoint refers to this top row. What a great name. They refer to this as the top row of buttons, top row. We have a group of buttons over here to the right. They refer to this as a button page, just means a group of buttons. And then down in the bottom, we have two rows that are always stay put. They call these the fixed rows, fixed. And as an example of this, if I click on more buttons, if I went to station functions, you can see this group of buttons is changing as I go along. Again, they refer to that as a button page. I can go back or I can go to home. But these buttons at the bottom, the fixed rows, they stay put, and our top row stay put. Today we'll be talking about how we edit these in terms of we can change the buttons, we can change the colors, we can create our own button pages and our own navigation. So that is where we are heading today. The place where we go for editing is going to be Setup, Point of Sale, and there's something called Touchscreen Codes. Before I really get into this though, I have to show you that for your company, when you click on the lookup, you might have a few, 2, 3, 4, you might have multiple touchscreens to choose from depending on what has been created over time. The thing that you'll want to know is which touchscreen do you actually use. So easy way to find that out is you go to Stations. It's in the same menu path. And I just hit the back button and you can see here where it'll tell you the touchscreen code that you're using. Touchscreens can be assigned by station. So even within one store, you might have a deli counter that has one layout and you may have a front counter that has a completely different layout. Again, I'm just going to go next, 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 and I see that for my test company, I'm using a touchscreen layout called Store 01. So here we go. So I go into my touchscreen editor. I'm going to find my layout, Store 01, and away we go. Now, I'll point out that there's this floating window. This is the actual editor. In the background, you'll see your actual layout. When you first open this, it's possible that the background might be minimized or it might be a smaller scale like that. If that happens, not a big deal. Just click on the maximize there, and then you'll have your full screen of your point of sale layout. So as mentioned before, we've got this top row of buttons, we've got button pages, we have fixed rows. Now, I want to start you off with good habits. Whenever you are coming in to edit a touchscreen layout, I would highly encourage you to first go to Layout, and down at the bottom there's a choice called Save, and we like to give this a name. I'm just going to call it the name of the layout, TS for touchscreen, and then put a date stamp on this. We are, let's see, I was already doing one earlier today, so I'll just call this B. So I'm saving a copy of my layout. That's actually saved to disk. And the reason why we do this, let's say in the course of editing today, maybe despite my best efforts, I do something horribly wrong. And maybe I don't even recognize that I did that, but then 10 minutes later, somebody from up front runs back and says, hey, you got to help us. Every time we click on customer lookup, it takes us to pay codes, or every time I click on pay code, it takes me to something else we didn't expect. If that was to occur, no big deal. You could always recover if you saved a copy before you came in. You could save very easily by clicking on load. You'd go back to your save copy, pop that back in, and you're right back to where you were. So that is essentially your safety net. And I can tell you, as someone who does this quite frequently, helping my customers, when I know I've got a backup, I'm much more confident in my editing because I know if I accidentally break anything, no big deal. I can always get back to where I started. So that is how you create your own safety net. On the tabs here, I'm going to start by just mentioning the General tab. Typically, this tab is used at the very beginning when we first installed your company. There's some choices here that affect the overall layout of your point of sale, but typically once this is set at the beginning, typically we don't go back and make a lot of changes to this. This is kind of the overall um, settings for your layout. In here, there's choices such as how many fixed rows, that's these choices down here, how many item rows, that's these column or these rows in your button pages, how many columns cross, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then how many buttons in this top row. So again, kind of basic foundational choices that we make early on, and we don't tend to make a lot of choices. Be careful if you go in and start changing item rows or columns. If I went down to 3 columns, Counterpoint will let me do that, but everything in this third column is just going to disappear. they don't warn you. It doesn't give you a heads up. It's just if you choose to do that, they're gone. So be careful if you decide to play with these settings. But again, this is the overall. You can pick your default fonts and whatnot if you like. You can set these here, but again, those are choices we tend to make at the beginning and don't do much with general. An area where we do spend a lot of time, this is probably where you spend 95% of your time, is this choice called buttons. And this is the tab where really when it comes to editing, this is where you're spending your time. So for today's example, I'm going to focus initially on a very, very common question that we get is our customers like to add a shortcut button on their touchscreen for ringing up items. And maybe this is an item that doesn't have a barcode. Maybe this is an item that is not convenient to scan at the register. I'm going to use an example later today as a 5-pound bag of ice. Maybe they're kept in a freezer, and it's just easier to have a shortcut button for us to sell those. So we'll actually do that example today, but I want to show you how we would create such a thing. So before we do that, I have to show you how the editor works. I'm going to use this quantity button as an example. Over here, you'll notice as I click on different buttons, Counterpoint is highlighting the button by putting these black squares around the outside and telling me which button that I'm working on. So I'm going to highlight this quantity one and just tell you a little bit about what's going on in the left window here. So the most important thing is the first question, which is action. There's a drop down here, and there's 65 options to choose from. And it's all the different things that a button can do. In this case, the action type is called quantity. Along with choosing the action, you have a choice of having an image. I'll show an example of that later today. A really common thing that you'll want to do. A lot of buttons may not have images, but all buttons are going to have a caption. I'll just change this to anything so you can see this. I'll change that to test. You'll notice it doesn't change immediately over here, but I can click preview and that will change. Or another way you can get this to refresh. Sometimes if you're watching me do editing, I'll simply click on a different button and that will cause that to refresh. Change this back to what it belongs. Quantity. So that's the caption. There's also something called hints. Some people like them, some people hate them. It just simply means on buttons, if you choose to have a hint, if you hover your mouse over a certain button, you'll get that little additional hint that pops up. Not all buttons have them. Some buttons do. Sometimes they're helpful. Sometimes they might block reading the rest of the screen as to what you're trying to do. So you can use hints, but use them as needed. So that's a hint for the quantity button. And then we get into some of the cosmetic things. The color, and this is a standard Windows color picker. There's some basic defaults here. If you want more options, you can go to other. Again, this is a standard Windows tool. You've probably seen this in other places like Excel or other places. And you can come in, modify, choose your own color, whatever. If you dial this in, let's pick a nice blue. You come up with a color you like, then you just click Add to Custom Colors, say OK, hit Preview, and there we've got a nice, lovely blue quantity button. I will say when it comes to colors, I'm a big fan of try to keep things simple. Oftentimes, if you see layouts that I've created, you'll see there's a background color. In this case, there's kind of a light olive green that gets used for a lot of the buttons. And then I tend to use color sparingly for things in this case like returns, voids, those type of things that are taking things off the ticket are red. But again, you can experiment with your colors, come up with a system that works for you. I will tell you, if every single button on here is a different version of neon green or yellow or pink, your users will not be very happy, and it'll be harder to find things. So use color to accomplish the goal, but not too much more. Anyway, so that's a little bit about the layout. And now I showed this one example of a quantity button. I do want to point out that depending what the buttons do, when you choose your action, the choices in the lower portion are going to change. Now I've got, from my example here, I have a few items. These are shortcut buttons. If you click these actually put the item directly on the ticket. And in this example, the action type is called item. And you'll notice that the choices down below changed. When I chose item, you'll notice that now there's a choice called item, whereas when I was on the quantity button, it wasn't asking about that. There's another very common button that we do that's called type button page. A good example of that is the More button, or it might be labeled Manager Functions on your touchscreen. This is a good example of the action type is called button page. And if I was in touchscreen, if I was at your register and we click this, it's going to take me to this new page. And I could look up that page. This is a navigation tool at the top. I could go find that page by just going like that. You'll notice these buttons on the right change as I choose that. Or a way I like to do this is if I have a button that's supposed to take me to a particular page, I like to click on that button here, and I like to use this little link right here to take me to that page. Sometimes you might have, someone's been editing, you might have a page called More Buttons. You might have a page called More Buttons New, More Buttons 2019, and you don't know which one's really being used. But if you use this system where you highlight the button, you click the little Follow Me link, and without a doubt, you'll get on the right page. In this case, it's called More Buttons. As long as we're here, I'll tell you that this, when we as LPA, when we create layouts, we tend to leave this button. Make sure everybody has one of these. It might be called More Buttons or Manager Functions. And at the register, if you go in, click on here, this gives you, it's basically a library of all the things that you can do in Counterpoint. So you can come in at the register, click into all these different places, and see these are all the different things you could do, right? So you can play around. As you go into this, you might find that there's some button. Here's an example. A no sale, that's where it opens the cash drawer. You might find some button saying, wow, that's really great, and I don't want my employees have to go 3-4 levels down just to get to that button. So you can use this as your library. If you find something you like, you can highlight that button. You can learn from here what are the actions and the images and the captions, or you can even just use this nice copy here. And I'm going to go back up to my main page, and I could choose to paste that right there. Okay. Now I'm not a big fan of putting a open drawer button right at the top level, but that's just an example of how you can copy. Okay. I'm going to clear that, and because I don't like blank squares, I'm going to copy from a nice colored square. I've got a few buttons here that are of type no action, but they've got a nice background color, so my screen looks nice. I will mention that as you're editing, I encourage folks never to go more than about 5 or 10 minutes without saving as you go. As we are editing, this is only in the computer's memory. It's not been saved to disk yet. And you could spend, unfortunately, this actually happened to one of my customers. They spent 2 hours doing a touchscreen edit, and then they lost power in their house. And that information, all that 2 hours of editing was just gone. And sadly, there was nothing that we could do about that. So I'll show you what that looks like. If we'd been editing for a while, I would just hit close as we go along. I just hit my save button, and now it's saved to disk, and I can continue editing. Hopefully nothing so drastic ever happens to you, but just know that's not a terrible idea to kind of save as you go. So some basic things that I pointed out so far. You click on buttons to do things. Here's an example. The action type is customer lookup. Here's a button. Action type is item lookup. So you can click on different buttons, kind of learn from your own layout as to different things, how they work. Now let's do the real life example of I want another button on my touchscreen, and I want this to be just simplify my life. We're going to put a button for selling some ice. Okay. Now I could build this from scratch, and if I was going to build this from scratch, I would go to find item type, or on the button type would be item. I could put a caption. I could say ice 5-pound bag. And now, of course, most important thing is down here, item. I need to go find that because that is what actually links the button to that item. So now that is type item, 5 pounds, and we're going to go test this, make sure this really works. You can play with some things here if you like. You can have a default quantity. You can even posit quantity if you like. But we'll just do this like this so you can see it. And I'm going to go into my standard point of sale. I have a shortcut here. And here we go. So we might be ringing up some items. You're scanning barcodes. You're going along. Life is good. And customer says, oh, by the way, I need a couple bags of ice. We've got our nice shortcut button here. You'll see that just put on one bag at a time. I clicked it again. It now said 2. And again, there's a checkbox where it says posit quantity. Let's see if I have an example of that. How about one of these? So these buttons have that turned on. You click on the button. If you say posit quantity, then you have a chance to go boom. And just like that, you can quickly throw items on a ticket. So that's an example of we created a brand new item. I'm going to show you a shortcut if you're going to do that to make your life a little bit easier. In this example, I created that button from scratch, line by line. And there's nothing wrong with that, but oftentimes in touchscreen editing, you might have a button that's already very similar to what you're doing. In this case, I've already got some item buttons here. So rather than creating a button from scratch, I could highlight a button that's pretty close to what I want. I could say copy, find an open square, say paste, and now all I have to do is I will fix a description. Maybe this is the ice 10-pound bag, and I'll just have to change the item. Somewhere in here I've got my 10-pound, and life is rocking and rolling, and everything's great. Now, in my simple example so far, I did the simple case where we just were putting an item button, adding it onto the screen, and in this particular example, I had some open squares, I had some open real estate. Wasn't a big deal to grab a square, throw some items. Now, in the real world, of course, you might have a few items or several items that you want to have a quick little shortcut for, and you're going to very quickly use up the 4x5 layout here, or whatever your layout is, and you're going to run out of squares. So the next topic that I want to show you, which is a common thing, which is how do we create an additional page of buttons. Okay, so again, we've been referring individual buttons we call buttons, but the entire group of buttons we refer to as a page of buttons. So I'm just going to clear this guy out and fill in the gap I just created. And we're going to talk about how we create an entirely new page. Now, I have kind of an existing example I'm going to show you I called it Quick Items 1. And I've got a whole bunch of items here. I use some 2 different colors just to make it look pretty. But I'm going to show you how we create something like this. So I'm going to go back to where we came from. And now let's say I've got a 5-pound bag, a 10-pound bag, a 20-pound bag. I'm running out of space, and I really just need a place for this. So this page that I already created, I called Quick Items 1. We're going to create a Quick Items 2 for ourselves. So I'm going to click here where it says New Page. And I should point out, up at the top, you'll see something that says Copy. That copy is an entire page, whereas down here, this copy refers to an individual button. So just to distinguish those two, I'm creating a new page, and we're going to call this Quick Items 2. Quick Items 2. And this is a nice blank page. Now I could go to this first square and start building my buttons one at a time from scratch, but I just showed you guys a nice trick here. I'm going to go find a button that I like. I'm going to say copy, and I'm going to go find my recently created Quick Items 2. I'll just paste that in. And that was so handy. I'm just going to go ahead and do that 2 more times because I've got 2 more styles of ice that I want to get on here. So here's my 5-pound bag, this item. If I click on the lookup, there's my 5-pound. Everything's great. Go to my next one. This will be our 10-pound. And again, it's not enough to do the caption. Most important thing is I actually change the item that it points to. And I've got one more here. I've got my 20-pound, like so. That was just the caption, but I need to be sure I come down here and grab this. And as long as we're at this, I think I will do my posit quantities because for bags of ice, it is very likely I could be getting more than one, make life a little bit easier for the cashier. So what did we do? We've created 3 buttons. The first one's a 5-pound bag. Looks like so. My item ends in 403. This one's the next item, 404, 405. So everything looks good. Of course, we're going to go test this. I'm not quite out of the woods yet, though. I created this nice page called Quick Items 2, but now I need to create a way for me to get there. I'm just going to hijack this button. It was of type item. Let's take this over. We'll say you are of type called a button page. And when we click that, we need to go somewhere. Where are we going? We're going to our recently created page called Quick Items 2. I can prove that this is linked up correctly just by clicking the little follow me link. Looks pretty good. I can hit my back. So that's linked up pretty nicely. I'll do one other trick here as long as we're here. Oftentimes if I have button pages, I'll give myself a back or a home button just to make navigation a little bit easier. So since they've got this already here, I'll take advantage of that. Just paste that right in there. And we've got some navigation set up for ourselves. So I don't usually go too far in editing without testing what we've got. And I realize I should fix this. We'll call this ice and more because we might add some more items on there. Looks pretty good, but of course the real test is go test. So save what we've got, and I'm heading back into point of sale. So we'll go try this out. Should be pretty cool. Before we just had an item or 2 off of the main screen, but now if I click ice and more, there's my brand new page. Check that my back button works. Looks pretty good. And now we'll try these out. I like it. So just do each one of these. Make sure that, sure enough, 5-pound, 10-pound, 20-pound. So again, 3 individual items, 3 different buttons, each one pointing to a different item. And of course, now that we've created this, lots of room for future growth. You might add some other items later in the future, and you've got a place to work. And I've got a nice back button to make navigation easy for my customers or my users. Even if I didn't do the back button, hopefully they're in the habit. They know about however you navigate. Everybody probably has a home button right there. So no matter what, they should have some way to get back to the top. Okay, so that was an example of, first we did an individual item, and then we did the example of creating an entire page. So I'm going to go back to our editor. I'll just mention there is another common request that we get for editing, and that is to add a pay code. I won't go through the full-blown example right now, but I just want to show you if I was adding a new pay code today, I would click on my whatever your tender or pay is here, and I would click the follow me link, because again, you might have a few different button pages. Maybe they're created at different times, and it's not clear which one is really your pay codes or your tenders. But if you highlight that, if you follow the follow me link, no question about it, this is where the user is going to be taken when they click on that. And then you might add in brand new pay code. Now I'll just show you, if I click on an existing button, I can see what the action type is. I can see how someone kind of created one of these in the past. But even more than just memorizing, if I was creating a new pay code, I could simply highlight that, say copy, and paste this in. And maybe I'm going to make up an example. Maybe this is a web pay code. I don't really care to have a hint. I may not even really care to have an image on this, but I'll call it that. Maybe there's a different color that I would like. And the rest of this example is you'd have to actually go in and create another pay code, which is kind of outside the scope of touchscreen editing. But that's where you'd be heading next if you're going to really add that next pay code. So that's, again, I mention this just because it's a very common thing, but that would be the beginnings of what you do if you're adding another pay code. Now, one thing I promised to show earlier is that you can do images in Counterpoint. And in the last year or two, Counterpoint's kind of upped their game a little bit, and they've been gotten better at how their images look on the layout, and they're using a style that is .png. That's P as in Paul, N as in Nancy, G as in George. And I'll show you an example of this. I scooped up a few examples off the web before I started today. So I'm going to go to my images folder. I'm going to show you what these look like. Again, .png. And I just found some examples online. The main thing about these examples that I found is that, I'll go back to this. So I found an ICE one, ice.png. They are transparent, at least the styles that I looked up, meaning if I grab one of these and I drop it onto my preview, you'll notice Counterpoint does a very nice job where I don't have a really ugly square where the image is that doesn't have my nice background. Because it's a transparent .png, it blends those together and it ends up looking really nicely. I'm going to, even though it's not the right image, I'll just show you. We'll throw an apple on here, and we'll throw some bananas on here, just to show you, again, if you find those .png, lots of sites out there, you can pick and choose, but sites that have clip art, or you look for that .png, and there's lots of examples out there. So that's what you can do. And by the way, if you're good at editing your own images, you can go create your own image. Just make sure that you make the background transparent, and you'll get that nice behavior. So I'm going to save as I go, as promised. And I'm just looking at my list here, see if there's anything else I want to be sure to cover. There was a question earlier that came up, which was about the centering of the text. And on the General tab, even though I said you don't typically do a lot of this, you do have a choice. It's a global choice, so it's not individual button, but you can pick if your text is top, center, or bottom. You can also play around with just the the spacing of things. If I didn't have an image on this, and maybe I wanted this to look a little different, sometimes even just playing with fonts and other things, you can create different effects just playing around. I'm going to put some extra spaces in here. You can accomplish different spacing and whatnot just playing around with the fonts and the spacing on that. So that's an example of that. Let's see here. Try to think if there's anything I want to be sure to cover. The biggest things are just one, knowing how to get into the editor, knowing that it's a good idea to save a copy before you get going, so you have a fallback. We went over the specific examples of creating individual buttons, and we went over how to create a brand new page. Here's one other trick. If you really get into creating button pages, this is a time saver. I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Go back to what we had. Maybe you're going along and you've created this initial page and you really like it, but now you need to now create another one. You want to save yourself a few steps, so you can actually copy an entire page. So I could copy this entire page. I'll call this Quick Items 3. And it may not be obvious, but that's an entirely new button page. And maybe we did this because this is for some different items. And so I would replace the items and the captions and everything else. But these would now be some different items. Why might you do that? Because some of the nice things that you already have, for example, the back buttons or other navigation, would already be set up for you. So if I go here, I've got quick items 1, I've got quick items 2, and I've got quick items 3. And you would play around with your button pages and give yourself some hooks into those. So right now, if I go back to my menu, here's my ice and more. Maybe I would copy from that and paste that. And we call this maybe, I don't know, quick, something like that. And we'd choose a new place for that to point. So this button takes us to 1. This button takes us to 2. This button takes us to 3. So that's just some basics. You can get as advanced or not advanced as you want when it comes to creating additional buttons or button pages, but hopefully that gives you a window into how you might do those. So that is what I wanted to cover for today. Again, the basics are being able to create individual buttons, being able to create pages of buttons, and just knowing the tool a little bit about being able to navigate and go from there. So again, under more buttons, that is definitely your library. You can play around with that right at the front register, learn all the things that are in here, and you might find some function. You're like, wow, that's really cool. Maybe I just want to move that a little bit closer up to the top. Give my employees a chance to do that. That's what I've got for today. If there's any questions, by all means, please reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help. So in the meantime, happy touchscreen editing, and let us know how it goes. Thanks, and have a great day.